Hello and welcome back to We Are the MMAC, a series of interviews showcasing the amazing staff and volunteers we have at MMAC that are integral to the functionality of MMAC and how it runs. Today we have Kathy McCart. She is one of the longest running volunteers here at MMAC, and does the vast majority of our data entry, which everyone else is very thankful for. So. Kathy, what brought you to MMAC in the first place?
Well, I have to say that even though I've lived here a long time, now most of my life, I can't say I really knew about the museum until I took a Molly class. Mm-hmm. And the curator from the museum at the time, Brandon, was talking about connoisseurship, how to interpret artworks. I took the class because I knew very little about art. And I was able to talk to him after the class because I was uncomfortable about the data that, in my mind, was missing from what we were looking at. And so it just so happened that he was about to implement software to try to capture data related to the pieces in the collection, and he invited me to volunteer. And I've been there ever since.
There we go. How long ago was that?
That was in 2011.
2011, so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There we go. Do you miss anything about it? How have things changed since then?
Oh my goodness. I would say that the most significant change has been how much more accustomed people are to using software and search engines and going online for looking at things. 10 years ago doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's almost like it's a world of difference between the way people use apps and Google and things now to do their own kind of research and looking things up and not necessarily have to call somebody on the phone to find something out. So that's been a big change. And it's perfectly suited for something like software and a database, so you can get the broadest reach possible.
Yeah, so how do you think your work has impacted the museum then?
Not having had any experience with the museum before I got there, I would say that I bring what I call a commoner's view to the art perspective. I like common terms and jargonless kind of ways to refer to things. And so I imagine that there's a huge user community out there that would like to see something and appreciate something without having to know too much about art in order to be able to do that. So
yeah,
I feel like an interface between that.
Absolutely, you're kind of the middleman, if you will. Yeah, totally. And I think with things going more and more online, and especially with coronavirus and having the necessity to, if you still want to enjoy art, right? So you are essential. So. You mentioned the program. What's the program, and why is that so important?
Are you talking about the software?
Yeah.
The software that we use is called Past Perfect. It's a commercial piece of software. It's built specifically for museums, not just art and cultural museums like ours, but libraries and historical museums, and it's programmed by museum professionals. So the terms that you use to make data entry and catalog information is museum-friendly kind of information and available to people within the museum. So, and the interface, which is the screens that you see that the data is entered into, is museum collection specific, and the back end, so to speak, is a database, which just is the place where all the data can live without you having to know how that gets done. So you can really focus on collecting the pieces of data that are pertinent to the objects.
There you go. And then I guess if you need to find out, then it's there now. So when you first started, you said there was some missing information. Is that right?
Well, when we first started, we just started collecting, I guess what you'd call common pieces of data, like title, artist, date, and then as the entry in the collection started to grow, it became apparent that maybe some context would be useful for that. So if you didn't know the artist or the title of a piece, but you were interested in, say, looking at landscape pictures or something about horses that you could use common words, and those images would be available to the public at large.
There you go. Yeah. So making just general organizing.
It seems
more or less.
pretty common and simple, but if you don't have it, the database doesn't know what you intend to do. So it's like, I don't know, if you don't have the title, then I can't find it for you. So.
I've certainly heard in a class I took here, I heard a horror story about someone who there was nothing, and so if you looked for something, everything was backlogged, and just what do you do? So which is why it's so important to have someone like you and a volunteer no less. So what do you do with your other time then when you're not at MMAC?
We'll just talk like it's 2019. Okay.
Sure.
I take Molly classes, which are usually here on campus.
What are Molly classes?
Molly classes are the Missoula Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and they are extended learning taught by professionals on specific subjects, and they happen in campuses all across the country. Here, the classes are often focused on science and history, culture, current events, and they're often taught by current and former professors. And 6-week-long classes, so it gives you a way to sample some information and get more background if you want to, and they often come with recommended reading lists. So that's, and events related to the classes, so kind of expands your world a little bit.
So obviously there was the connoisseur class, right? Have there been any others that have really piqued your interest?
Oh my goodness.
And you've ran with?
Well, sometimes I take classes because I'm pretty sure I don't like the subject, and but I don't know anything, so I just want to find out. A good example of that is taking a class on opera. I didn't know anything about opera. I took a class, and within a year or two, I had a membership to watch the operas downtown at the Roxy, and have gone to a couple of live operas and watch them online. So another example is I didn't know anything about Central Asia. I took some classes on Central Asia, Persia, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and every year on campus there's a Central Asian conference, and now I make sure to attend that and listen to the speakers, and there's just a world that's opened up to me from knowing a little bit more and being able to dive in with professors.
Certainly, yeah. Well, and obviously it's brought you to MMAC, and you've been here for a long time, longer than me, certainly. You said, Brandon, what was his last name? Renchis. So he taught the course and then invited you to volunteer, right? How has, obviously he's not working for MMAC anymore, how has the changes in administration affected you, and what's happened about it?
Well, I have to say, I have to make sure to give Brandon credit for going out and finding the software and implementing it for the museum. That, I just fell in behind all that kind of stuff happening and realizing that was an important piece. And there have been, in 10 years, it seems like it's almost natural for an organization of any size to have some turnover and change, but I've always felt very welcomed when I show up, and if there's something going on that feels like I should be in the mix, I'm invited, and so it's a very comfortable and welcoming environment.
Oh, glad to hear it. Yeah, I felt the same way.
Good.
So do you sit behind a desk all day usually, or do you get to interact with the objects very often?
I don't. I hardly ever see anything live. I have been invited by the curators a couple of times over to the storage area to see how labels are applied to pieces and how the items are stored, which gives me a feel for when I'm looking at records, electronic records of things, where those came from. But I hardly ever look at anything live.
Yeah, you wish you did?
I did. When it comes to capturing a huge collection like the museum has, you need to maximize the time you have on data entry for each particular object, so you can't sit down and examine something for an hour and then put one record into the database. I mean, so the idea is to get the inventory in and get data fully captured into the database so that you can keep up with new acquisitions. And so
yeah, the never-ending process.
It never
ends.
Yeah.
So where do you get your assignments? Where do you start your projects from?
Well, we started initially with what records were being kept. Of course, paper records were being kept, and then at various times different spreadsheets were initiated and people would add records to those. And so those were the two primary sources. And then of course the software has much more capability than either one of those had. For example, you might have a paper record that shows who the donor was, the date, the title, the artist, but it might not say anything about what's actually represented in the painting or in the image, you know. So if there's a river in there or there's wildlife or something, you want to capture that kind of information and put it inside the database, because if you may not have that on the piece of paper. So you have to kind of look at the image, see what's represented there, and then put it in there.
Yeah, certainly. And when you're entering stuff, I'm sure you have plenty of images that you could insert as well, which really help.
It depends on, some of the paper records have lots of pieces of paper in there, but not always an image to go with that piece of paper. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe there was a different method of keeping the images separate from the paper, but part of the challenge is tracking down the image too and making sure it gets associated with the right pieces of data.
I'm sure you've had some doozies.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Every once in a while. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like I've said this before, but with the size, with MMAC's collection, it's big.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, have there been any objects that have really stood out to you at all? Or anything you've worked on that's really...
Oh, there's been a ton of stuff. Recently, we started tracking down the data related to the Paxson piece of Sacagawea, and then tracking back and make sure we had all the data for the Paxson pieces that we have in the collection correctly labeled, and found that was a little variation between, you know, maybe 5 years later, then somebody does an inventory and tracks things down and writes something down. So it feels important to get the right current information related to the piece so that when you show it online or when you exhibit it, people can rely that that's in fact what the data is, the truth is.
Exactly, yeah, so you work tirelessly to make sure that
well, I wouldn't say
everything's tirelessly. But you work well enough, right? Yeah. Still, and I don't know, I'll thank you again, because data entry is not certainly a strong suit of some people. So to have
the data entry part is like the finished piece of investigating the record and tying the pieces together. And so when you feel like you've got the accurate result, then it's like, okay, we'll put this in and make sure it goes in the right place and it's in the right format. So when people look at the record, they know that they can, you know, rely on consistency between this record and that record. It'll be first name, last name, first name, like that.
So would you say your work is more investigative?
It depends. When I was doing straight from the spreadsheet, and the records, at various times they're more complete than others, you know, depending on what was going on and who was working on those things. So, and then you could refer to the paper records and get a more complete picture. So, but sometimes there are gaps. So,
always gaps.
Yeah.
What can you say about the museum's collection policy and how that's kind of changed over the years? Because obviously, you know, you've done many of just all sorts of, you know, sculptures and paintings and from here and there, but do you think it's been refined a little more, or?
I can't say I have a really informed opinion on collection policy. I look at, over the years, there have been collections that have been donated, brought into the collection, and so I look at those individually, and you try to imagine what the collector had in mind and why those pieces were collected by that person over the years, and try to discern intent from that. But I don't know if I could say enough about the policy of way things are collected. I have to say that the way data is recorded is and always will be like an ongoing challenge to keep up with contemporary terms and make sure that the interests of people today are reflected in, and not that the piece is like frozen in time and can't be reinterpreted. So.
Yeah, as with art, everything can be reinterpreted,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is amazing. So, before your stint in MMAC, what did you do? What did you for a profession?
Oh, I worked in IT. For the Forest Service. Back before anybody had a personal computer, when they were just little lumps of plastic on desktops that were connected over phone lines to a computer in a remote location. So, it was quite a change from 70s.
Yeah, you think that's helped you in your work now?
Yeah, absolutely. It gave me an interest in accuracy and how much time an organization can save with the professional skills of the people that they hire, and not having to go out and find data and look through records. And you want your professionals to be able to use their professional skills, their analytic skills and their interpretive skills. And so if they can just round up data and do that and not have to go get data, so it makes it a lot better for an organization.
Absolutely, yeah. The Forest Service, obviously, if you're in Montana, you can't really escape it. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
But gorgeous place. Though. I love Missoula.
Yeah.
Right. And you're from around here?
I'm not.
No?
But I lived here for a long time. I transferred over here from Idaho, and I grew up in Washington State. So this is home now, I guess. I guess I'm a native after 30 years. I'm not sure what the criteria
naturalized.
are. Yeah.
Something like that. So I take it you've probably been to a few shows here at MMAC, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have any that stood out to you?
Probably the Jim Todd collection, where he's relating his cartoon drawings that he did as a child that his mother gave to him many years later, and his reinterpretation of those drawings. I don't know, maybe it's 2 or 3 years ago that exhibit was in here. That was pretty impressive. Just to see somebody's skill and artistic talent over a span of years like that. And he was, I think, 5 years old or something like that when he did those. Plus it covered kind of a war period, and so seeing the war from a child's viewpoint was really interesting.
Certainly, yeah, I agree. There are some nice shows. I mean, the show in here right now, the African show, it's much more global.
Yeah, it is. It's just not something you would encounter. I mean, just not in my frame of reference or world. So it's great.
Right here in Montana,
I know.
of all places.
It
I know,
is.
and
It's
all these items are what from our. I think one of them lives in Arlee, and I think the other collector lives in town.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Very close by. Well, Kathy, this has been great. Do you have any closing thoughts on MMAC, on your work, on how the public can get involved in MMAC, and anything?
I would say that that public interest in the data that we have online can generate activity to focusing on putting more records out there. And it's rewarding to know if somebody's actually looking at that website and seeing what's going on out there. I also say that an organization, if it captures data and handles it kind of on a handle once, put it in once kind of basis, that it's really saving money in the long run, so you don't have to go out and re-inventory and recapture data. You have a baseline that you can use going forward, and so it's really a money saver for a museum.
Yeah, well, and you gotta museums. They gotta save every penny.
Yeah.
I know, but even though they have so much to show off. Well, all right. Well, thank you so much.
You bet.